What I'm going to say today is not new stuff. There's no revelations here. Basically, you've heard everything over the last 2 days as part of the elements of and details of each of the talks. A lot of the stuff segues nicely from Bruce, Jillian this morning, from Derek and Tim yesterday, those kind of things. So I'm going to go over those kind of things, and we'll go from there. Management is the transformation of resources into utility. So I got this from the internet, actually, and I thought it fit in the context of what we want to talk about today. Of course, earlier on we said the sociological, the addition of the sociology of goods and services from the environment, and this kind of fit for what I want to focus on. Again, bringing everything together. Forests supply services to human beings. We can acknowledge that as a principle. And then I've divided the services that we've already talked about again between the three major categories: social, economic, and over here ecological. But I'll just deal with some of the details here. Some of the social things we've got: aesthetic, recreation, spiritual. We talked about those today. Economic, some of the more obvious one: forest products, food, the certain aspects of food. They're medicinal. Some of the forests of the world are starting to yield some pretty high-end medicinal products. Hunting and guiding, that's a big industry. Yeah, I put in industrial here. It does remove the overstory. Industrial in Alberta especially is out there. It basically defers the forest for a number of years to another use, but it still is out there as a pseudo use. So I threw it in there anyway. It's a big one. Ecological watershed, habitat, and we're looking at carbon sequestration, O2 exchange, that kind of thing. So here's the big cloud that came over us. MPB damage and destruction has equaled the loss of potential services. Now, I use the word potential here because if we haven't got to it yet to use the service, then it's a potential service. As an example, forest management, if we've got to it already and used the initial natural service, which would be the timber that we took off, and we're growing a regenerated stand, and mountain pine beetle comes in and whacks it down, then we're losing the potential service for that, which is already the secondary growth. So just some meaning around that word anyway. And as a sidebar, and when I was putting this together, I wanted to make sure, being a soils guy or thinking that soils is very important, I wanted to kind of throw this in, that compromised soil physical properties, which is always part of management. Let's make sure that we consider that as well, because significantly increased complication in your future management decision. If your soils are damaged or compromised, you're in serious trouble for the future. Just throw that in there. So what are the options that we do have? Again, focusing this whole discussion with the intent of focusing us for the scenarios that we're going to go through later on. We have two options. I've narrowed it down to: we can do nothing. So if we do nothing, nature will heal itself. We know that. And again, getting back to the soils discussion, as long as the soils are intact, and in the NPB situation, mostly we see, other than any reciprocal erosion or slumping or anything that happens afterwards with the loss of overstory, we're really just seeing a change in the overstory condition. Usually the soils in most of the stuff that we've seen are reasonably intact and still knitted together by the understory as well. You can do nothing, or recover the services and manage to new service opportunities if you have that option. So the implications of doing nothing: you have an altered successional pathway. It is after mountain pine beetle damage. Obviously, we're not on the same successional pathway that a natural stand would be let's say in the boreal forest or in the western forest of the foothills. And then you have, if you do nothing, the services that were there, you can't be sure that in the future they'll recover to the same level. You can take your chances. Again, nature will heal itself, everything else being equal, but what services that were there, where are they now? And what will they be in the future? Increased risks include erosion and soil instability, of course, from loss of overstory, altered watershed function. Forest fuel risks, that's not necessarily tied to a service per se, but it is a real implication in the context of risk, something that is real enough that at least we in ESRD are considering an important consideration in managing for the future. Reduced or eliminated service function, as we've already said, or service potential. Safety, I threw in safety. If anybody's recreating in these kind of woods, of course we've got tops falling down and trees falling over and this and that, so I just threw that in there as something to consider. With choosing to do nothing, you have no future expenditure really. You save on budgets, or you don't have to spend money. You just have to take advantage of what nature can give you in the long run. In the option restore and recover services, which is the second one, the second option, you have the implications of choosing to do that. Obviously, you will need a management expenditure to do something. You require budget dollars for that. The implication of you have the potential to recover services, but they are temporarily set back. That is, your temporal scale changes. You require the application of manpower. Again, that's part of budget or part of logistics. That's an implication of choosing this particular management strategy. Or you have one service traded off while managing for another. Sometimes you end up taking advantage, and we'll go into this a little bit detail later, but you take advantage of what's already on the site in order to save some dollars, but you may be sacrificing the achievement either temporarily or successfully on site of achieving the service that you really want. We took a stab, Brooks and I took a stab at defining rehabilitation. Thanks for the help, Brooks. We try to get this narrowed down. So definition here, the act of promoting and maintenance of recovery of the goods and services through active silviculture or horticultural intervention. So that's pretty well how we're sort of conducting ourselves. And then I'd like to be able to focus, again, our work on the scenarios under this particular perspective. So what do you do when you start? So under the option, restoring services, we've already gone over the do nothing. Do nothing, spend no money, take what you get when nature comes. We're going to go into choose an objective, restore the previous service lost, or take opportunity to recreate alternate service. So you've got two choices there. Of course, you look at your area. What have I lost? What was there? How important was it? And you make that value judgment or that value assessment. And then you take the opportunity to either bring back what was there or say, hey, wait a minute, I've got an opportunity to make this something else. It fits better within the larger scale. We heard today, I believe Jillian said, referring to a much larger sort of regional perspective and then getting back down to the local again. So it's constantly moving between the local and the specific eco-site and then back up to a much broader sort of planning level is really the advice that we would like to bring across. Some objectives could include grizzly habitat, caribou, some of the primary ungulates that are also attached to an issue in terms of the future, and that songbird, another one that comes up fairly regularly in our discussions on the effects on forest. Recreation, the sociological reason, watershed, timber, and fuel management. Again, fuel management's in there as an objective. As I explained earlier, it's very, it is seen to be, and I suggest that it is very serious for the future. In terms of the change of stand structure and fuel types, we need to understand the dynamics of what we've chosen to do. So we have a couple of options there. Of course, we study up on that particular subject, or we hire an expert, and the last 2 days, just some really great experts in the room that understand their particular subject and the dynamics that go into that. You can't manage something unless you understand the cause and effect and the dynamics within that particular entity that you're managing is what I suggest, and I think that's a pretty obvious statement. The elements of habitat for primary or desired species. What do you need? What do you need for food? We heard about that yesterday, food and shelter, those kind of basics. In terms of fuel management for fire, your safe fuel odor structure, what's the best structure? What will cool the forest? What do I have to do? Do I have to, if I'm doing fuel management as an objective, do I have to convert the forest to another species? Things like that. Connectivity, continuity across the landscape, these could be goals as well, and you need to understand how that works. Back to Jillian's comment about look regional, then come back down to the ecosite. Site assessments required, of course, in a pre-harvest silviculture prescription, I would suggest is probably the best way, or some derivative of that. Get out there and start to look to see what's on your site right away, and Brooks has alluded to that as well, from a larger extent and on site as well. Assess the extent of the damage to the stand. You'll need to know that, because I think that links to what you can use on the site eventually and what you'll have to actually replace through some kind of intervention. Site factors and limitations. This is this is not new to any one of you that have done a silviculture prescription. This is pretty basic stuff, but I thought I'd list it all here, just kind of focusing you again into this perspective so we can do, or so you can have a much better consideration for what you're going to do with the scenarios that we're putting before you. Slope and slope position makes a difference on site, elevation aspect, all of these things that are here, seepage, depth of frozen soil, that has to do with permafrost. If you're in the far northern areas, of course, your planting depth, coarse fragments, things like that. Your humic layer, available nutrients, moisture regime, nutrient regime. That's pretty standard for silviculture prescriptions. Understand your site. Climate factors and limitations, of course, with frost potential, if you're putting seedlings back, if you're trying to get something to survive and to actually grow in a half-decent form or whatever. Rainfall, of course, your precipitation. Prevailing winds. Prevailing winds affect seed cast, ingress, structure, your potential for fall down, as Bruce had pointed out this morning. The prevailing winds, especially if your prevailing winds are hurricanes, that could be a consideration. But the basic message is know the ecosite classification and site factors. The site will tell the story. You just get your details and then take a look at that. So that's something that you need to do for a good prescription. Look for opportunities available on the site. As I've said a couple of times here just now, work with the reproductive silvics of tree species. What can you use? Is it going to sucker back to aspen? Is that desirable? If the aspen comes back, is that something that's also desirable as forage for ungulates, which will bring more ungulates to the area, things like that. So you've got possibilities there. With the pine gone, will my aspen come back? We've got a lot of pine-aspen associations on the west side of Alberta in different areas, and that's something that may also work in the context of species conversion for cooling the forest. If I move my fuel type pure pine or pine aspen with a fair amount of pine in it, it's all dead now. I take that out of there and allow for the suckering to come back. I've converted to aspen, and that has cooled the forest, or at least in a relative sense it does, changing species. Take advantage of local seed sources, back to the prevailing winds thing. Where are the spruce? If the spruce are going to be the next species, hopefully to the west of where you're working, there's some seed sources to the south and to the west where our prevailing winds in Alberta are. Always look for that. Utilize existing regeneration, your undamaged advanced growth. We heard about that this morning as well in Bruce's talk. Understand and presume the regeneration of low brush and ground plant species. So pay attention to what's on the ground. No crown's gone, greater sunlight, something's going to happen. I know that Ellen mentioned that yesterday. Everything's kind of exploded in a few spots, or at least we surmise that it has, based on the fact that there's increased light. Reasonable access, that certainly is an economic reason. You got to get to this site to do some treatment. If it doesn't have reasonable access, you're going to be flying in. That's a big cost, okay? And that could very well nix the choice to even do anything if it's not reasonable. Another part of that particular point is in forest management, perhaps choosing to do something, to put some investment into something in terms of forest management if it's closest to the mill or it makes sense in the context of future advantages. Forest stand's ability to recover. So you, again, assess the damage. Level of this is a function of a level of damage, age, and potential for reinfestation. Take a look at that just to see if it's going to come back on you later, sort of thing. And understand which tree species could work best to meet the objective. So setting an objective, of course, is important, and then work from that point. The greatest productivity in the shortest time, for example, in species. Economics of establishment and maintenance of that species. And, of course, consider the future, climate change effects. That always comes in there as well. So we can employ silviculture and arboriculture in and appropriate level of funding and clear but adaptive objectives with a long-term commitment, and that's how we can get the meet our restoring of services in this context, and I'm a great believer in formulas, so in this particular case, since my background is silviculture prescription, as I've said as a summary to all I said today, silviculture prescription equals rehabilitation objective and site climate assessment. Strategies to meet the objectives as you're going to design and operational realities, and that includes availability of contractors, that includes all sorts of different situations, the climate of the day and all of that. And the final outcome, execute the plan, monitor for success, and be ready to adapt accordingly.